Hi, everyone. My name is Katie O'Hara Krebs, and I am the social media editor for Portal Libraries in the Academy. Today, I am pleased to welcome Erik Ziedses Research and Scholarly Engagement Librarian at the University of Dayton. He is here to speak about his article, Building a Research Inventory to Tell Your Institution's Story. This article can be found on Portal's preprint site in Volume 26, Issue 1, and the article is free to read, and viewers may access it by navigating to the Johns Hopkins Press preprint site for Portal. Welcome, Erik. Thanks for being with me.
Hi, Katie. Thank you so much for
Yeah,
having me.
of course, of course. So I wondered if you could give our viewers and readers a little bit of background on the inspiration behind this research topic.
Sure. So something that I've always had a very personal interest in is finding ways of documenting and sharing like kind of grassroots or DIY efforts within librarianship. Ways that small teams of people that might have limited resources can approach perhaps some of these larger scale projects, and then maybe try to formulate solutions behind them. So in my life outside of libraries, I'm a musician. I've been a musician for more than 20 years at this point, and a lot of that has been operating at that DIY level of self-recording, self-booking tours, shows, things of that nature. But really, just keeping within that spirit of approaching large, sometimes imposing things with limited amounts of resources and leveraging your community to just try to make things happen in that way. So,
That's great. Wonderful. And do you mind if I ask, would you share what instrument you play or do you use your vocals for sharing your gift with the world?
I play bass guitar, and I think the nicest way I could say it is yes, I do use my vocals, but I would not perhaps insult the more formally trained out there. But I bring a lot of enthusiasm to it. I guess I would say that.
Well, that's wonderful. And I love how, you're outside of your librarianship helps inform some of this research that you're doing. So
Mhm.
thanks. I wonder if you could give us a summary of the article that was published in Portal. Just some highlights, so anyone who hasn't read it yet, any of those viewers who haven't read it yet might, go ahead and take a gander at it today.
Absolutely. So in February of 2024, I was asked to join a working group here at the University of Dayton. The university was really trying to take a critical look at the topic of artificial intelligence to try to make some institutional level decisions as to what directions they needed to go, like what sort of investment they needed to make in things like technology or research infrastructure or things like that. So, one of the things I was tasked with as a member of this working group was determining pretty much everything the University of Dayton had done from a research perspective on artificial intelligence. Of course, this goes back far beyond our more contemporary understanding of artificial intelligence in the generative sense, to all of the earlier definitions, machine learning, just all the various ways that that has been applied. So we were trying to figure out, is this something the university has some sort of historical foundation in? Do we have a precedent for doing this sort of work? Is this something that we have, interest in investing in moving forward? So we had very limited amount of time to get this work done. We had 3 months between February and May of 2024 before our final report had to be turned into the provost. So a team of faculty members, fellow faculty members from our computer science department and myself, we sat down and tried to think of a way of how we were going to gather all of this information within that time period. So this was a lot of meetings revolving around keyword development with these experts in the field. Uh, where are the pieces of vocabulary where this research could be found? And then finding a tool, in this case, you really using Web of Science a lot and the affiliation search function within that to generate these lists of research articles using all the various vocabulary terms that the computer science faculty and myself developed together. So as the kind of um, you know tech not technology expert, I would say, but the tool expert of the team, I started reviewing all of these lists and compiling them into this database of sorts. Keeping the computer science faculty and other members of the team looped in to provide critical support there, saying, like, well, maybe this one doesn't really fit into our scope. You can remove it from the list. And that sort of work just continued over the course of several weeks and months with our small team, just getting through this backlog of articles that, in the case of University of Dayton, ended up dating all the way back to the early 1990s of some of these foundational concepts of artificial intelligence that developed over time. And what we found in this was, not only this historical precedent for the university being involved in this sort of work, but an upward climb in our involvement over the years. A very crucial question that came up when the university was having these conversations was like, well, why are we going to go into AI stuff now? Are we just chasing a trend? Why are we doing this pretty much? And through this sort of work and being able to tell the story of what we had done before, it is my hope that maybe it set some folks at ease in terms of us taking more of an institutional directional look at this sort of thing. But yeah, so it was that sort of work, just working through this very large backlog of articles and putting them in a nice, easy to digest form. The other thing that I really liked about it were the stories that it unearthed along the way was, a lot of not just faculty level research, but it unearthed a lot of graduate student research involvement and undergraduate student involvement on these topics over the years. Even some people in staff roles in different offices around the university. And I think, with this methodology, it really showed that, our involvement with this particular research topic was a community-wide endeavor over time. It wasn't something confined to just one area of the university. And I think with this methodology, you could really unearth the way almost any topic has been explored by a university in the various areas across it.
Yeah, I found the article really intriguing in that way of thinking about how you use that and how others might be able to use this similar methodology to highlight stories for their institutions as well. Yes. Yeah.
One more thing I was hoping to add
Mhm.
about that as well is that I really want to emphasize that a lot of my work is showing how you can do this with limited resources and not just showing how you can do that from like a positive way, but also trying to underline the drawbacks to that as well. Because I can only really talk about what our experience was with this project. And while some of my methodology and the means with which we obtain this information, is accessible to maybe somebody who doesn't have access to a lot of intensive technological resources. I did try to go out of my way in the article to really underline that, this method does take a lot of time. It will get you the results, but it's just something to consider if you are in a position of limited resources, whether that is people or time or things like that. One of the big inspirations I did find was actually a portal article published back in 2015, I believe it was. It was by Peg Burnett, which was called the Research Audit Model, which was an incredibly detailed read about how she and the team she was working with at the time, back in 2015, built this massive technological infrastructure for tracking this sort of information that a university might generate. And unfortunately, I did not have the time to build something like that out in the 3 months that I had for this project. But again, a lot of my goals as a researcher are showing how you can do these things with perhaps more limited means.
Yeah. Well, in fact, the fact that you already had a short window of time to do this work, and then in the manner that you accomplished it so successfully, I think that's really telling, and I appreciate those positive and negatives because as in the library world, we are met with sometimes, staff limitations, financial limitations, things like that. How do we address this research and keep doing the good work? Within all of those. So thank you for pointing that out. So if for those viewers who might not have read it yet, I think I have an idea, but I want you to share with us what's a takeaway? What's one of the big ideas that you want our readers and viewers to get from your article and kind of, ponder on after they have read it or after they have listened to our conversation today?
I think one of the biggest takeaways I would hope people get from my article is that that the library can be a very helpful partner when it comes to discovering or telling an institution's story. How librarians, we have expertise and skills with our different tools and resources that can be leveraged to fill in a lot of this background information and help advise upper administration at our institution who might be considering different new directions for their institution but might not have all the answers as to why yet. We have, I think when people think that they might consult like libraries about this sort of thing, they might default to thinking of something like archives or something that it really explicitly tells the history of the university. But for as many great things as archives have, I think it's also what librarians can really do in this situation is really get a hold of what the actual paper trail has looked like over time and what is this whole research what does this whole research history look like. I think one of the other big takeaways is that I would hope people really get an impression of my enthusiasm for leveraging the different parts of our community for success like this. I love any opportunity that I get to work with folks outside of my unit. So it was a lot of fun for me to be able to collaborate with, the computer science faculty members that are not even part of my liaison area, but I get to learn a lot about, what are their perspectives about this and our potential new research directions. What do they think our needs are as an institution? I go back to my example of I go back to my perspective as a musician a lot with this again because being an active member of a musical community, not one person can play every instrument 90% of the time. And it's so much fun when you're in a music situation where you say you want like a cello on a song or something like that, but you don't know how to play cello, but you have a friend who does. You can reach out and make that connection and bring in these new perspectives and new sounds to make something really cool in this instance. So that's just kind of a mindset that has really translated over to my professional perspective a lot is having a lot of enthusiasm and respect for the unique talents and perspectives of people in our community and using it to paint these portraits of what we've done.
Yeah, that's a great, I appreciate that. I hope we can all hold on to that and get some of that enthusiasm and lean into that a bit in the library world. So thank you, Eric. Well, I want to really thank you for taking this time to share more about your article, about yourself, about your perspective and your idea on how libraries are and we all are in this world. I want to just remind viewers again that they can read the article for free on the Johns Hopkins Press preprint site for Portal. Eric, any final thoughts you want to leave us with?
Um, just thank you again for having me. You know, I was very excited to have this article appear in the pages of Portal. It was again because I have a lot of this enthusiasm for community and things like that, and I always appreciated this journal's perspective of it because it's right there in the title, like libraries and the academy. Like it is saying that we are part of this bigger community and it really focuses on the ways that libraries interact with the different units and sectors on campus and just shows how we're all trying to hopefully produce something positive as a group and all that. So I was very intentional in wanting this article to be in Portal and very happy that I was given the opportunity to publish with you all. So thank you again for having me.
Oh, well, the pleasure is all ours. Thank you for doing this research and speaking with me today. I know that viewers will be clicking on this link and also hopefully on your preprint article and taking a look there. For all those watching today, thank you for being with us and keep an eye out for upcoming author interviews. Thank you to Eric and everyone. Have a good day and be well.